The place, Annapolis. The time, the last day of my duty tour as Army Liaison Officer to the Naval Academy. The impacts of those 2 years, of great traditions and the tenets of dynamic sea power, these will endure. The monuments to the past at the Academy have become more than curios to me. They are expressions of pride in a great past which has shaped our Navy. But even more than the past, the present has left me with an overpowering conviction that the United States Navy is as much an expression of this nation's will and its ideals as it is a superb fighting service dedicated to the preservation of those ideals. Three-fourths of our planet is ocean, 330 million cubic miles of it, and all of it the Navy's domain, in peace and in war. The Navy is the essence of sea power. Its greatest weight in the affairs of men derives from one simple fact. It is there, not a fleet of blueprints, hopes, or plans, but a fleet in being. By its very existence, this fleet in being is a deterrent to would-be aggressors who prowl the same oceans with weapons of supersonic death. When we think of the uneasy truce called peace, so frequently assailed by an ideology pledged to our destruction, the reality of the Navy looms larger than ever. This Navy of ours, rooted in the past, is also a Navy capable of meeting the lethal dangers of the present. As the enemy grows stronger with every tick of the atomic clock, so too our Navy gains nuclear sinews daily. It has become a Navy of giant aircraft carriers with flight decks 3 times the length of a football field. Its ground combat force, the Marine Corps, is an arm of that sea power. Throughout the Navy's history, whether landing on enemy shores in whale boats or helicopters, the Marines have added greatly to the Navy's versatility and flexibility in the accomplishment of its mission. It is an up-to-date Navy of electronic profile. A Navy of sleek, nuclear-powered silhouettes with missile systems more lethal than the biggest batteries of floating rifles. The Navy's nuclear silent service is logging history with tremendous accomplishments. The submarine Nautilus was the first to cross the polar cap under nuclear power beneath the ice. The Triton, first to circumnavigate the globe submerged, traveling 41,500 miles in 84 days without refueling. The Sea Dragon and the Skate, first to rendezvous at the roof of the world. And the Sargo, first to cruise 31 days under the ice cap, crossing the North Pole 16 times. Considering the total balance of the Navy, there is an area of might beyond the sum total of its offensive potential. It represents the power to keep the peace. In these days of neither peace nor war, the United States Navy has helped in large measure to stay any aggressor's hand by creating a weapon to serve as a deterrent. It takes an immortal event to immortalize a moment in time, and such a moment flashed into being when from the depths of the Atlantic, a missile emerged, the Polaris. In test shot after test shot, the Polaris has traveled its supersonic 1,500-mile journey to the target, blazing a tribute to the service which brought it into being. With 16 nuclear-tipped Polaris missiles aboard, the nuclear submarine carries more potential destruction than all the bombs dropped during World War II and Korea, a fact for all would-be aggressors to ponder. While the fleet is being reforged on the atomic anvil of our time, its traditions of the past remain a living thing. As the past is prelude to the present, so too the Navy of today and tomorrow sails in the wake of all its yesterdays. If tradition can have a beginning, then surely Captain John Paul Jones epitomized it in his immortal reply to the British offer of surrender. "I have not yet begun to fight." A tradition continued by men like Decatur and Perry, by Farragut and all the men of the Navy, past, present, and future. It gained beyond measure in the wars that were to follow, when in the First World War, the Navy convoyed 2 million soldiers across the Atlantic without loss of one life, and shepherded 100,000 merchant ships through U-boat-infested waters. At the time of America's entry into the war, the German submarine wolf packs had almost brought the Allies to their knees. The Navy's ingenuity in devising new weapons against the German submarines was in the tradition of a fleet dedicated to secure the future of freedom. When, for the second time in a generation, war came to America, it was the Navy that took the first staggering blow at Pearl Harbor. Yet it came back with greater honor and power than anyone had thought possible, and surprised the enemy with its audacity against overwhelming odds. In this Second World War, almost lost to tyranny, the Navy fought a two-ocean, two-front war. In the Atlantic, over which millions of American soldiers had to be ferried, Allied lifelines had to be kept open. It was round two against another generation of submarine wolf packs. In the Pacific, the Navy's pattern of counterattack became a classic. It was immortalized in the grinding years of seeking out the enemy fleet and destroying it in encounter after encounter. Only a pitifully few carriers, cruisers, and destroyers were available in that first year of the Pacific War. But the Navy made do with what it had. Skill and courage first tipped the scales at Midway. In the Coral Sea, superb combinations of sea and air power spelled disaster to a planned Japanese invasion of Australia. Such victories at sea were followed by amphibious assaults on beach after bunker-studded beach. First by the Navy's own ground combat forces, the Marines, and later together with the Army. This team of Army and Navy made Japanese-held islands stepping stones to victory. The pattern also worked in the Aleutians, where the Japanese had gained a foothold. In Leyte Gulf, the same deadly pattern was repeated. In one decisive night in Surigao Strait, the remaining Japanese fleet was sunk or crippled by battleships resurrected from the mud of Pearl Harbor. The enemy's last desperate gesture was reduced to kamikaze raids on a fleet that had come to stay. Meanwhile, the pincers of a giant army vice closed on the Japanese in the Philippines and spelled the beginning of the end of the war in the Pacific. It was right and proper that the surrender terms should be signed in Tokyo Bay on board a Navy ship, the USS Missouri. Without the Navy, this moment would never have belonged to history. While the war in the Pacific moved toward its inevitable end, the greatest armada in history crossed the English Channel. Together with the British, the American Navy transported the assault troops to the beaches of Normandy, an operation of incredible complexity. Naval fire made a shambles of German bunkers and batteries in preparation for the assault. With the assault troops ashore and moving inland, the man with a rifle voiced a heartfelt, "Well done." The long tradition lengthened in Korea. First at the Busan perimeter and beyond, when flat tops of the Navy were the only close airfields available. Navy and Marine pilots provided sorely needed air combat support for the hard-pressed ground troops. Later, the landing at Incheon changed the course of the war. Without the Navy's command of the sea, there would have been no landing and no envelopment of the North Korean Army. The Navy's might made possible that end run, resulting in a crushing defeat of the Communists and, for all practical purposes, the elimination of the North Korean People's Army from the war. If courage in battle is in the naval tradition, then no less is the Navy's fight against obsolescence. In the search for new and better naval weapons and tactics, experimentation and research are a naval constant. It is predicated on one idea: to enable American sea power to carry out the mission assigned to it. The naval line of technological development is, like naval tradition, a direct one. The sailing frigates gave way to the lumbering ironclads of the Great White Fleet. In due time, yesterday's battleships were retired to the mothball fleet and the salvage yard, to be replaced by ships better suited to current needs. In naval technology, nothing is ever absolute. During the years after World War I, the Navy experimented with lighter-than-air aircraft, the Zeppelin. The helium-filled blimps briefly filled a need, and then they too joined the past. When aerial test bombs sank old battleships in the 20s, pessimists pronounced the Navy finished. Instead, the Navy accepted the airplane as merely another adjunct to sea power. With the advent of the aircraft carrier, it became part and parcel of the fleet and naval tactics. One result of the Navy's early experience with aircraft was dive bombing, developed and perfected in the years between the two world wars. Carrier-based dive bombers became the nemesis of Japanese ships during World War II. Today, the modern attack carrier with almost 100 supersonic jets and other aircraft aboard is the Navy's capital ship. The airplane did not herald the demise of the Navy, but instead extended its capabilities and power. Underwater also made possible a new dimension in amphibious landing technique, vertical envelopment. In naval usage, vertical envelopment is landing ground troops by helicopter behind enemy lines in the amphibious assault. This tactical maneuver, originated by the Marine Corps, is now accepted as standard. Underwater demolition is an important phase of naval operations. Frogmen like these in training can be released from submarines in enemy waters to plant demolitions or neutralize enemy obstacles. Refueling while underway is another Navy development. It has made possible greatly extended cruising ranges without need for an extensive base system.